Hey everybody, so in honor of World Book Day, I thought I should record a chapter. So here is chapter 30, The Count of Monte Cristo, The Guests. In the house in the Rue de Helder, to which Albert de Morcerf had invited the Count of Monte Cristo, great preparations were being made on the morning of the 21st of May to do honor to the guest. Albert de Morcerf's house was at the corner of a large courtyard, opposite another building set apart for the servants' quarters. Only 2 of the windows face the street, 3 others overlook the courtyard, and 2 at the back overlook the garden. Between the court and the garden was the spacious and fashionable residence of the Count and Countess de Morcerf, but in the unsightly imperial style. A high wall ran the whole length of the property facing the street, and was surmounted at intervals by vases, and divided in the middle by a large wrought iron gate, with gilt scrollings, which served as a carriage entrance, while pedestrians passed in and out of the building through a small door next to the porter's lodge. In the choice of a house for Albert, it was easy to discern the delicate foresight of a mother who, while not wishing to be separated from her son, realized that a young man of the Viscount's age needed more entire liberty. On the other hand, the intelligent egotism of a young man enchanted with the free and easy life of an only son who had been thoroughly pampered could also be recognized. On the morning of the appointed day, the young man was sitting in a small salon on the ground floor. A valet entered. He had in one hand a bundle of newspapers, which he deposited on a table, and in the other a packet of letters, which he gave to his young master. Albert glanced carelessly at the different missives, selected 2 perfumed envelopes which were written in a small, neat handwriting, opened them, and perused their contents with a certain amount of attention. "How did these letters come?" he asked. "The one came by post, and the other one was brought by Madame Danglars' valet. Inform Madame Danglars that I accept the seat she offers me in her box. Wait a moment. Sometime during the day tell Rosa that when I leave the opera, I will sup with her as she asks. Take her 6 bottles of assorted wines, Cyprus, sherry, and Malaga, and a barrel of Ostend oysters. Get the oysters from Borel's, and be sure to tell them they are for me. What time do you wish breakfast, monsieur? What time is it now? 9:45. Very well, have it ready punctually by past. By the way, is the Countess up yet? If the Viscount wishes, I will inquire. Do. And ask her for one of her liqueur calories. Mine is incomplete. Tell her also that I shall have the honor of calling on her at about 3 o'clock, and that I ask permission to introduce someone to her." The valet left the room. Albert threw himself on the divan, opened 2 or 3 newspapers, looked at the theater page, turned up his nose on perceiving that an opera and not a ballet was to be given, looked in vain amongst the advertisements for a tooth powder of which he had heard, and finally threw down one after the other of the 3 leading papers of Paris, muttering between his yawns, "Really, these newspapers become more and more boring every day." Just then a carriage drew up at the door, and a moment later the valet announced Monsieur Lucien Debray, a tall, fair young man with a pale face, clear gray eyes, and thin, compressed lips, wearing a blue suit with chaste golden buttons, a white necktie, and tortoiseshell eyeglasses on a fine silk cord, entered the room with a semi-official air, without smile, and without saying the word. "Good morning, Lucien, good morning," said Albert. "What punctuality! Did I say punctuality? Why, I expected you last, and you have arrived 5 minutes to 10, whereas the time fixed was 10:30. It is really marvelous." "Monsieur Beauchamp," announced the servant. Come in, you wielder of the terrible pen," said Albert, raising and advancing to meet the young man. "Here is Debray, who detests you and will not read your works. Anyhow, that is what he says. Quite right, too, for I criticize his works without even knowing what he does," said Beauchamp. "Good morning." Then turning to Albert, he asked, "What sort of people are you expecting for breakfast?" "A gentleman and a diplomat," was the reply. "That means waiting another 2 hours for the gentleman and about 3 hours for the diplomat." "Nonsense, Beauchamp," said Albert. "We shall sit down to breakfast punctually at 10:30. In the meantime, follow Debray's good example and taste my sherry and biscuits." "Well, then, I will stay. I must do something to distract my thoughts this morning." "Monsieur de Chateau Renan, Monsieur Maximilien Morel," said the valet, announcing 2 fresh guests. "Now we are all here and can go in to breakfast," said Beauchamp. "If I remember rightly, you only expected 2 more guests." Morel, Albert murmured, surprised. Morel? Who is that? But before he had finished speaking, Monsieur de Chateau-Renaud and a handsome young man of 30, and a gentleman to his fingertips, took Albert by the arm, saying, "Allow me to introduce you to Monsieur Maximilien Morel, captain of Cephas, my friend, and, what is more, my savior. Salute my hero, Viscount." So saying, he stepped to one side and disclosed to the view of all present the tall and noble-looking young man with the wide brow, penetrating eyes, and black mustache, whom our readers will remember having seen at Marseilles in circumstances sufficiently dramatic to prevent his being forgotten. A handsome uniform, partly French and partly Oriental, set off to perfection his broad chest decorated with the cross of the Legion of Honor, and showed up his graceful and stalwart figure. The young officer bowed with easy politeness. Being strong, he was graceful in his every movement. "The Baron of Chateau-Renaud knew what pleasure it would give me, monsieur, to make your acquaintance," said Albert courteously. "You are his friend. Be mine too." "Well said," remarked Chateau-Renaud, "and I hope that, given the occasion, he will do as much for you, Viscount, as he has done for me." "What has he done for you?" "Oh, nothing worth mentioning," said Morel. "My friend is exaggerating." "What? Not worth mentioning?" said Chateau-Renaud. "Is life, then, not worth mentioning? Upon my word, that is rather too philosophical, my dear Morel." "It is evident from all that this Captain Morel saved your life. Tell us about it," said Beauchamp. "Beauchamp, old fellow, you know I am dying of hunger," said Debray. "Don't begin any of your stories now." "Well, that won't prevent us from sitting down to table," replied Beauchamp. "Chateau-Renaud, can you tell us the story while we are at breakfast?" "Messieurs," said Albert, "it is not yet 10:15, and you know I am expecting another guest." "Well, then, as we cannot go in to breakfast," said Debray, "pour yourself out a glass of sherry as we are done, and tell us what took place." "You all know that I had a fancy for a trip to Africa," began Chateau-Renaud. "Being unwilling to let such talents as mine lie dormant, I decided to try upon the Arabs some new pistols that had been given me. I therefore embarked for Oran, whence I reached Constantine, arriving in time to witness the raising of the siege. I entreated with the others, and withstood the rain during the day and the snow night fairly well for 48 hours. On the morning of the 3rd day, my horse died of the cold, poor beast. My horse now being dead, I was compelled to make my retreat on foot. 6 Arabs rushed me at a gallop to cut off my head. I dropped 2 of them with 2 shots of my gun, and 2 more with my pistol, but there were still 2 more, and I was disarmed. One of the Arabs caught hold of me by the hair. That was why I now wear it short, for one never knows what may happen. The other one put his yataghan to my throat, and I had already felt the cold point of the steel when this gentleman, who you see here, charged down upon them, killed with a shot of his pistol the one who held me by the hair, and with his sword severed the head of the other, who was making ready to cut my throat. He had set himself the task of saving a man on that particular day, and chance chose me to be that man. When I am rich, I shall have a statue of Chance made by Klingman and Morchetti. It was the 5th of September, said Morel, smiling, the anniversary of the day on which my father was miraculously saved. Every year I celebrate the day as far as possible by some action. The story Monsieur Morel is alluding to is a most interesting one, continued Chateau-Renaud, and he will tell it you when he knows you better. Today let us fill our stomachs and not our memories. What time are you having breakfast, Albert? At 10:30. To the minute? Asked Debray, taking out his watch. You must give me 5 minutes grace, said Mokoff. I am waiting for I am expecting a savior too. Whose savior? Mine, to be sure, replied Mokoff. Do you think I cannot be saved too, and that it is only Arabs who cut off heads? Our breakfast is a philanthropic one, and we shall have to table 2 benefactors of humanity, at least I hope so. Do you think he is likely to be punctual? Asked Debray. Everything is possible with him. Well, with the 5 minutes grace, we have only 10 left. I will profit by them to tell you something about my guest. I was at Rome last carnival. We know that, said Beauchamp. Yes, but what you don't know is that I was carried off by bandits. There are no bandits, exclaimed Debray. Indeed, there are, and ugly fellows, too, or rather I should say fine ones, for I found them frightfully handsome. To continue, the brigands carried me off to a very gloomy spot called the Catacombs of St. Sebastian. I was told I was their prisoner subject to a ransom, a mere trifle of 4,000 Roman crowns. Unfortunately, I had no more than 1,500. I was at the end of my journey, and my credit was exhausted, so I wrote to Franz. Oh, yes, Franz was there too, and you can ask him whether I am telling you the absolute truth or not. Well, I wrote to Franz that if he did not come with the 4,000 crowns by 6 o'clock, I would have gone to join the blessed saints and glorious martyrs by 10 minutes past, and I can assure you that Monsieur Luigi Vampa, that is the name of the chief of the bandits, would have kept most scrupulously to his word. But Franz did arrive with the 4,000 crowns, said Chateau Renaud. A man bearing the name of Franz de Epinay or Abel de Moncrief is certainly not at a loss for some of that amount. No, he simply came accompanied by the guest whom I hope to introduce you to in a few minutes. He said 2 words in the chief's ear, and I was free. I suppose they even apologized for having kidnapped you, said Beauchamp. Just so, was the reply. Why, this man is a second Aristo. No, he is nothing more nor less than the Count of Monte Cristo. There is no Count of Monte Cristo, said Debray. I do not think there is, added Chateau Renaud with the air of a man who got the whole European nobility at his fingertips. Does anyone know of a Count of Monte Cristo anywhere? Perhaps he comes from the Holy Land, said Beauchamp. One of his ancestors most likely owned cavalry just as the Motemont owned the Dead Sea. Pardon me, messieurs, but I think I can help you out of the dilemma, said Maximilian. Monte Cristo is a small island I have often heard mentioned by my father's old sailors. It is a grain of sand in the middle of the Mediterranean, an atom in the infinite. You're quite right, said Albert, and the man I speak of is lord and master of this grain of sand, this atom. He has doubtless purchased his title of count somewhere in Tuscany. There is no Count of Monte Cristo, exclaimed Debray. There is 10:30 striking. Confess that you have had a nightmare, and let us go into breakfast. The sound of the clock had hardly died away, however, when the door opened and the valet announced, His Excellency, the Count of Monte Cristo. All those present started involuntarily, thus showing the impression Albert's recital had made on them. Albert himself was seized with a sudden emotion. They had not heard the carriage in the street, nor any steps in the antechamber. Even the door had been opened noiselessly. The Count appeared on the threshold, dressed with the utmost simplicity, yet the most exacting dandy could not have found fault with his attire. He advanced smiling into the center of the room and went straight up to Albert, who shook his hand warmly. Punctuality is the politeness of kings, said Monte Cristo, at any rate according to one of our sovereigns, but in spite of their goodwill, travelers cannot always achieve it. I trust, however, that you will accept my goodwill, Count, and pardon me 2 or 3 seconds by which I have failed in keeping our appointment. 500 leagues are not made without some trouble, especially in France, where it is apparently forbidden to beat the postilions. I was just announcing your visit to some of my friends, who I have invited to do honor to the promise you were good enough to make me, and whom I now have the pleasure of introducing you. They are the Count Chateau Renaud, who traces his nobility back to the 12 peers, and whose ancestors had a seat at the Round Table, Monsieur Lucien Debray, private secretary to the Minister of the Interior, Monsieur Beauchamp, a formidable journalist and the terror of the French government, and Monsieur Maximilian Morel, captain of Cephas. On hearing this latter name, the Count, who had till now bowed courteously, but almost with the proverbial coldness and formality of the English, involuntarily took a step forward, and with a slight tinge of red spread over his pale cheek. You wear the uniform of the new conquerors, monsieur, he said. It is a handsome uniform. One could not have said that what caused the Count's voice to vibrate so deeply, or why his eye, usually so calm and limpid, now shone as though against his will. Have you never seen our Africans, Count? Albert asked. Never, replied the Count, who had gained complete possession over himself once more. Beneath his uniform beats one of the bravest and noblest hearts of the army. Ah, Monsieur de Moncrief, interrupted Morel. Let me speak, Captain. We have just heard tell of such a heroic action on his part, continued Albert, that though I see him today for the first time, I ask his permission to introduce him to you as my friend. At these words there was again discernible in Monte Cristo that strange fixed stare, that furtive flush, and that slight trembling of the eyelids, which in him denoted emotion. You have a noble heart, said he. Monsieur, said Albert, breakfast is ready. Count, permit me to show you the way. They passed into the dining room in silence. The Count was, it soon became apparent, a most moderate eater and drinker. Albert remarked this and expressed his fear that the outset Parisian life might be distasteful to the traveler in the most material, but at the same time the most essential point. If you knew me better, said the Count, smiling, you would not worry about such an almost humiliating matter in regard to a traveler like myself, who has lived successfully on macaroni at Naples, polenta in Madrid, olla podrida in Valencia, pialu in Constantinople, carrack in India, and swallows' nests in China. Cooking does not enter into the calculations of a cosmopolitan like myself. I eat whatever is set before me, only I eat very little. Today, however, when you reproach me with moderation, I have a good appetite, for I have not eaten since yesterday morning. Not since yesterday morning, the guests exclaimed. You have not eaten for 24 hours. No, I was compelled to deviate from my route to get some information from Nîmes, which made me a little late, so I would not wait for anything. So you ate in your carriage, said Mokov. No, I slept as I always do when I am bored and have not the courage to amuse myself, or when I am hungry and have not the desire to eat. Can you then command sleep at will? Asked Morel. More or less. I have an infallible recipe. That would be an excellent thing for us Africans, who have not always enough to eat and rarely enough to drink, said Morel. That may be, said Monte Cristo. Unfortunately, however, my recipe, which is excellent for a man like myself who leads an exceptional life, would be very dangerous when administered to an army, which might not waken when it was needed. But do you always carry this drug about with you? Asked Beauchamp, who, being a journalist, was very incredulous. Always, replied Monte Cristo. Would you mind if I asked to see one of these precious pills? Continued Beauchamp, hoping to take him at a disadvantage. Not at all, replied the Count, and he took from his pocket a wonderful bonbonniere, scooped out a single emerald, enclosed by means of a gold screw, which, being turned, gave passage to a small round object of a greenish color and about the size of a pea. The pill had an acrid and penetrating odor. There were 4 or 5 of them in the emerald, which was large enough to contain a dozen. The bonbonniere passed from one guest to another, but it was to examine the wonderful emerald rather than to see the pills. It is a magnificent emerald, the largest I have ever seen, though my mother has some remarkable family jewels, said Chateau Renan. I had 3 like that one, returned Monte Cristo. I gave one of them to Grand Signor, who has it mounted on his sword, and the second to His Holiness the Pope, who has it set in his tiara opposite one that is very similar, but not quite so magnificent, which was given to his predecessor, Pius VII, by the Emperor Napoleon. I have kept the 3rd one for myself and have had it hollowed out. This has certainly reduced its value by 1/2, but has made it more adapted to the use I wish to make of it. Everyone looked at Monte Cristo in astonishment. He spoke so simply that it was evident he was either telling the truth or was mad. What did the 2 sovereigns give you in exchange for your magnificent gift? Asked Debray. The Grand Signor gave me a woman's freedom, His Holiness the life of a man. Was it not Peppino you saved? Exclaimed Mokov. Was it not in his favor that you made use of your right to a pardon? Perhaps, said Monte Cristo, smiling. You have no idea, Count, what pleasure it gives me to hear you talk thus, said Mokov. I had spoken of you to my friends as a fabulous man, a magician out of the Arabian Nights, a sorcerer of the Middle Ages. But Parisians are so subtle in paradoxes that they think the most incontestable truths are but flights of the imagination, when such truths do not enter into their daily routine. For instance, they contest the existence of the bandits of the Roman Campana or Ponte Marshes. Pray tell them yourself, Count, that I was kidnapped by these bandits, and that in all probability, without your generous intervention, I should today be awaiting the eternal resurrection in the catacombs of St. Sebastian, instead of inviting them to breakfast at my humble little house in the Rue de Hodé. You promised me never to speak of that trifle, said Monte Cristo. If I relate all that I know, said Monkhoff, will you promise to tell me what I do not know? That is only fair, replied Monte Cristo. Well, then, I will relate my story, though my pride must inevitably suffer thereby, began Albert. For 3 days I thought I was the object of the attentions of a masked lady whom I took to be the descendant of Tuila or Popokea. Perhaps I was being lured by the coquetry of a contadina. You will note I say contadina to avoid using the word peasant. All I know is that, fool that I was, I mistook for this contadina a young bandit of 15 or 16 with a beardless chin and slim figure. Just as I was taking the liberty of imprinting a kiss on his chaste shoulder, he put his pistol to my throat, and with the aid of 7 or 8 of his companions, led, or rather dragged me to the depths of the catacombs of St. Sebastian. Here I was informed that if by 6 o'clock the next morning I had not produced a ransom of 4,000 crowns, I should have ceased to exist by 6:15. The letter was still to be seen, and is in Franz's possession, signed by me, and with a postscript by Luigi Vampa. If you doubt my word, I will write to Franz, who will have the signature legalized. That is all I know. What I do not know, Count, is how you contrive to instill such great respect into the Roman bandits, who have respect for so little. I will own that both Franz and I were lost in admiration. I have known this famous Vampa for more than 10 years, said the Count. When he was quite young and still a shepherd, I once gave him a gold coin for showing me my way. To be under no obligation to me, he gave me a poignard carved by himself, which you must have seen in my collection of arms. Later on, whether it was that he had forgotten this little exchange of presents which should have sealed our friendship, or whether it was that he did not recognize me, I know not, but he tried to kidnap me. I, however, captured him together with 12 of his men. I could have delivered him up to Roman justice, which is somewhat expeditious, but I did not do so. I set him and his men free. On condition that he should sin no more, said the journalist, laughing. It delights me to see that they have kept their word so consistently. No, Monsieur Beauchamp, on the simple condition that they should always respect me and mine, and, continued the Count, I will appeal to these gentlemen. How could I have left my host in the hands of these terrible bandits? As you are pleased to call them. Besides, you know I had a motive in saving you. I thought you might be useful in introducing me into Parisian society when I visited France. No doubt you thought this was but a vague plan on my part, but today, you see, you are forced with the stern reality and must submit to it under pain of breaking your word. And I shall keep my word, said Moukoff, but I fear you will be greatly disillusioned, accustomed as you are to mountains, picturesque surroundings, and fantastic horizons, where France is such a prosaic country and Paris such a civilized city. There is but one service I can render you, my dear Count, and in regard to that I place myself entirely at your disposal. I can introduce you myself, or get my friends to introduce you everywhere. You have really no need of anyone, though. With your name, your fortune, and your talented mind, Monte Cristo bowed with a somewhat ironical smile, you can present yourself everywhere and will be well received. I can, therefore, only serve you in one way. If my knowledge of Parisian customs, or of what is comfortable, and if our shops can be of any use to you, I can assist you in finding a suitable establishment. I will not offer to share my apartments with you as I shared yours at Rome, for, except myself, you would not see a shadow here unless it were the shadow of a woman. Ah, the reservation of a family man. May I congratulate you on your coming happiness? It is nothing more than a project, Count. And he who says project means accomplishment, retorted Debray. Not at all, said Moukoff. My father is anxious it should be so, and I hope soon to introduce you, if not my wife, at least my future wife, Mademoiselle Eugène Danglars. Eugène Danglars, exclaimed Monte Cristo. One moment. Is not her father Baron Danglars? Yes, the newly created Baron. What does the matter so long as he has rendered a service to the state which merits such a distinction, was Monte Cristo's reply. He has rendered the state very signal services, said Beauchamp. Though a liberal in opinions, in 1829 he effected a loan of 6 millions for King Charles X, who made him Baron and Commander of the Legion of Honor. Now he wears the ribbon, not in his waistcoat pocket as one would imagine, but in full view in the buttonhole of his coat. Oh, Beauchamp, Beauchamp, said Moukoff, smiling. Keep that for the Corsair and the Charivari, but spare my future father-in-law in my presence. Then, turning to Monte Cristo, he said, You mentioned the Baron's name just now as though you knew him. I do not know him, said Monte Cristo carelessly, but in all probability I shall not be long in making his acquaintance, since I have a credit opened with him through Richard and Blout of London, Arstein and X of Vienna, and Thompson and French of Rome. As he pronounced these last two names, Monte Cristo stole a glance at Maximilian Morrel as if he expected to startle him. He was not disappointed. The young man started as though he had an electric shock. Thomas and French, said he. Do you know that firm? They are my bankers in Rome, said the Count calmly. Can I exert my influence with them on your behalf? You might, perhaps, be able to help us in inquiries which have up to present been ineffective. Some years back, those bankers rendered a great service to our firm, and for some reason have always denied having done so. I am at your orders, replied Monte Cristo. But in speaking of Monsieur Danglars, we have altogether strayed from the subject of our conversation, said Maximilian. We were talking about a suitable house for the Count of Monte Cristo. I should like to offer him a suite in a charming little house in the Pompadour style, which my sister has taken in the Rue Meslay. You have a sister? Asked Monte Cristo. Yes, and an excellent one. Married? For the past 9 years. Happy? As happy as it is permitted to a human creature to be, replied Maximilian. She is married to a man she loves, who remained faithful to us in our bad fortune, Emmanuel Herbold. I live with them when I am on furlough, continued Maximilian, and my brother-in-law, Emmanuel, and I would be only too pleased to place ourselves at your disposal, Count. Thank you, Monsieur Morel, thank you very much. I shall be most happy if you will introduce me to your brother-in-law and your sister, but I cannot accept your kind offer of suite in your sister's house. My accommodation is already provided for. What? Are you going to put up at a hotel? Exclaimed Morcoff. You will not be very comfortable. I have decided to have my own house at Paris. I sent my valet on in advance, and he will have bought a house and furnished it ere this. He arrived here a week ago, and will have scoured the town with the instinct of a sporting dog alone possesses. He knows all my whims, my likes, and my needs, and will have arranged everything to my liking. He knew I was to arrive at 10 o'clock this morning and was waiting for me at the Barrière de Fontainebleau from 9 o'clock, and gave me this piece of paper. It is my new address. Read it for yourself. So saying, Monte Cristo passed Albert a piece of paper. Number 30, Champs-Élysées, read Morcoff. The young men stared at one another. They did not know whether Monte Cristo was joking. There was such an air of simplicity about every word he uttered, in spite of its originality, that it was impossible to believe he was not speaking the truth. Besides, why must he lie? We must content ourselves with doing the Count any little service within our power, said Beauchamp. In my capacity of journalist, I will give him access to all the theaters of Paris. Thank you, monsieur, said the Count, smiling. I have already instructed my steward to take a box for me at every theater. You know my steward, Monsieur de Morcoff? Is it by any chance that worthy Signor Petruchio who stands the hiring of windows so well? The very same. You saw him the day you honored me by breakfasting with me. He is a very good man, and has been a soldier and a smuggler, and in fact has tried his hand at everything possible. I would not even say that he has not been mixed up with the police for some trifling stabbing affair. Then you have your household complete, said Chateau Renaud. You have a house in the Champs-Élysées, servants and stewards. All you want now is a mistress. I have something better than that. I have a slave. You take your mistresses from the opera house, the vaudeville, the music halls, but I bought mine at Constantinople. She cost me dear, but I have nothing to fear so far as she is concerned. But you forget that we are Franks by name and Frank by nature, as King Charles said, and that for the moment that she steps on French soil, your slave becomes free, said Debray. Who will tell her that? Asked Monte Cristo. Why, the first person who sees her. She speaks nothing but Romaic. That is a different matter, but shall we not at least see her, or have you eunuchs as well as mutes? Oh, dear no, said Monte Cristo. I do not carry Orientalism that far. Everybody around me is at liberty to leave me, and on leaving me will have no further need of me or anyone else. It may be that is the reason why they do not leave me. They had long since passed to dessert and cigars. My dear Albert, it is 12:30, said Debray, rising. Your guest is charming, but you know the best of friends must part. I must return to my office. Are you coming, Morel? As soon as I have handed the Count my card. He has promised to pay us a visit at 14 Rue Mallet. Rest assured I shall not forget, said the Count with a bow. Maximilian Morel left with the Baron of Chateau Renaud, leaving Monte Cristo alone with Morcoff. I tripped over a few words in there, but I hope you all enjoyed the chapter, and I'll see you later.